Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Have you ever seen a moment so sharp, so cutting, and so brutally honest that it froze an entire audience, leaving them in stunned silence? Picture this. A young American student stands up with confidence, convinced she's about to outsmart one of the most respected diplomats on the planet. She frames her question with arrogance, assuming she holds the truth, expecting India's Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar to falter. But within moments, the atmosphere changes. What was posed as a question transforms into the setup for one of the most striking truth bombs ever delivered in international dialogue. This is not just about a heated exchange between a student and a minister. It's about something far greater. It's about how the global balance of power is changing in the 21st century. It's about how countries once seen as developing are no longer willing to accept lectures from the so-called superior nations of the West. And above all, it's about how India, through the voice of Jaishankar, made it unmistakably clear that the age of one-sided narratives is finished. Now, before I break down the moment that left the American student visibly stunned, let me set the stage. The event was a prestigious Q&A session at a US university, a place celebrated for free speech, a place where students are encouraged to raise difficult questions, but also a space where the Western mindset dominates, where young people are often shaped to believe that their worldview is the only legitimate one. Into this arena walks Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, recognized worldwide for his sharp intellect, calm presence, and unmatched ability to reduce complex global politics into blunt, undeniable truths. The American student, emboldened by the familiar setting, asked a question that echoed what many in the West have quietly suggested for years. Her question dripped with subtle condescension, wrapped in the language of human rights, global responsibility, and democratic values. On the surface, it sounded like a fair inquiry, but read between the lines, and you see it wasn't a question at all. It was an accusation. An accusation aimed squarely at India's choices, its partnerships, and its policies in an unsettled world. And here's where the tension grew. Everyone in the hall expected Jaishankar to give a polished, diplomatic response, something cautious, carefully worded, and sugar-coated as diplomats often do. But that is not Jaishankar's style. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, adjusted the microphone, locked eyes with the student, and delivered what can only be described as a devastating truth bomb. A statement so forceful that the ripples are still being felt in conversations across continents. He declared, "You don't get to sit thousands of miles away and preach morality to us when your own record is written in wars, invasions, and double standards. You ask me why India takes a certain path. The answer is simple: because we refuse to be victims of someone else's history." The room fell silent. The assured expression on the student's face dissolved into discomfort. At first, a few people clapped hesitantly, then more joined in with genuine conviction. And yet, that was only the beginning. Jaishankar didn't stop at one cutting line. He went further, exposing the hypocrisy woven into Western narratives. He highlighted how the United States questions India on democracy while maintaining close ties with regimes notorious for their human rights abuses. He pointed out that wars waged in the Middle East, costing countless innocent lives, are explained away as operations for freedom, while India defending its sovereignty is treated as questionable. He reminded everyone that during the Cold War, the West used India as a pawn. And now, when India dares to stand tall and independent, suddenly accusations about morality and values emerge. Then came the masterstroke, the words that truly closed the discussion. He stated clearly that the time when a few nations could write the rules of the world while others followed silently has ended. "This is not the 20th century anymore," he said. "India will pursue what is in India's interest unapologetically." Those words carried immense weight. They weren't only for one student but for the entire world to hear. Think about it, this wasn't merely an exchange during a university event, it was a declaration that India will no longer play the quiet, hesitant participant on the world stage. Through leaders like Jaishankar, India is asserting itself with confidence, speaking truths the world would rather avoid hearing. And that is precisely why the moment resonated so deeply, going viral not just for its drama, but for its authenticity. People in Asia, Africa, and Latin America recognize themselves in his words. They too are exhausted from lectures, weary of double standards, and tired of being judged by nations with histories marked by war and exploitation. They saw in Jaishankar's response not just the voice of India, but the voice of the broader global South pushing back against narratives imposed by the West. It is impossible to ignore the irony. America's foreign policy has long been shaped by interventions, from Vietnam to Iraq, from Afghanistan to Libya. And yet when India chooses to purchase oil from Russia, it suddenly becomes a moral crisis. When India builds its defense capacity, it becomes a democratic concern. The hypocrisy is striking, and Jaishankar called it out bluntly, in real time, without hesitation. The student likely believed she was delivering a tough, provocative question. She didn't realize she was giving Jaishankar the perfect platform to dismantle decades of Western arrogance in less than 5 minutes. And let me be clear, this wasn't just India versus America. It was about the entire global order. For centuries, the West controlled narratives through its media, its academia, and its diplomacy. But in that one exchange, Jaishankar made it clear that the world is changing, that former colonies no longer need the colonizers' approval, and that the universities of Harvard, Princeton, or Georgetown do not hold the sole authority to define legitimacy for humanity. If you think this was a rare moment, you're mistaken. Jaishankar has consistently delivered such reality checks in interviews, press meets, and international conferences. He has become the symbol of unapologetic Indian diplomacy. Remember when he was asked about India purchasing oil from Russia? His reply was simple and firm. "My duty is to secure the best deal for my people. If Europe can put its energy needs first, why can't India?" Another blunt truth bomb. Or take the time he was questioned about Western criticism of India's democracy. His response was equally direct. "We are not sitting in judgment of others, and we expect the same courtesy in return." Again, a powerful statement. Every time he speaks, the message is unmistakable. India is not a side character in someone else's story anymore. India is the author of its own story. Now pause and imagine the mindset of that American student after hearing those words. She came prepared with what she thought was intellectual ammunition, but instead of exposing Jaishankar's weaknesses, she exposed her own shallow grasp of international affairs. That is the brutal truth bomb. The West's narrative no longer stands strong when confronted with facts, history, and fearless honesty. What Jaishankar did in that room went beyond diplomacy. It was psychological. He inverted the power dynamic. Typically, students or journalists are the ones who corner leaders with hard questions. But here, the leader turned the tables, cornering the questioner. The balance of authority shifted, and once that change occurred, there was no returning to the old order. This is why I consider it a defining moment, not only for Jaishankar, not only for India, but for the entire global South. For decades, nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America have felt suffocated by Western narratives. They've been told how to govern, how to trade, how to think, even how to live. But now they are discovering their voice. And India, with its rising economic and strategic weight, is leading that wave of resistance. So the real issue isn't whether Jaishankar shut down an American student with a sharp truth bomb. The deeper question is, what does this reveal about the future of global politics? And even more importantly, what does it mean for everyday people like us? That's where the story truly becomes fascinating. In Part 2, we'll explore the ripple effects of this exchange, the lessons it holds for the West, and why Jaishankar's words are destined to echo for decades ahead. But before we close this first part, let me leave you with one thought. When history is written, moments like these, seemingly small but immense in their impact, are often remembered as turning points. That day, in that hall, with that question and that response, the world witnessed the end of one era and the birth of another. The age of lectures has ended, the age of dialogue has begun, and India, through Jaishankar, is no longer politely asking for respect. It is asserting it. Yet, friends, we cannot stop at that single fiery exchange, because the truth is, Jaishankar's words that day were not just a clever answer. They were the expression of an entire philosophy, an entire strategy that India has been patiently shaping for years. To understand why that moment struck so deeply, we need to step back and see the bigger picture. For decades, international politics was dominated by a handful of powers. They decided who was right and who was wrong, who was democratic and who authoritarian, who deserved sanctions and who deserved support. They held the moral loudspeaker, and the rest of the world had no choice but to listen. But today that balance is shifting, and India is right at the center of this transformation. When Jaishankar spoke, he was not merely defending India's choices. He was giving voice to the frustrations of dozens of nations that are tired of hypocrisy. Look at Africa, where Western nations extracted resources for centuries and then turned around to lecture about sustainability. Look at Latin America, where coups and interventions engineered by foreign powers left whole regions unstable, yet they are still given sermons about governance. Look at the Middle East, where wars waged in the name of democracy left behind shattered societies and endless chaos. And then look at South Asia, where India has endured, scarred but unyielding, refusing to bow down. That student probably believed she was standing on the higher moral ground, but what she failed to realize was that her question was nothing but a mirror reflecting the arrogance that the world is rejecting. And with brutal honesty, Jaishankar held that mirror back up to her face. Now let us break down the ripple effects of that moment, because words may appear to be just words, but in the realm of geopolitics, they can move mountains. First comes the psychological effect. Imagine being a policymaker in Washington, accustomed to Indian leaders politely nodding, choosing their words carefully, always avoiding offense. And suddenly, here is a man who doesn't just push back, he dismantles your argument in front of your own people. That transforms perception. It demands respect. And in diplomacy, respect is everything. Second comes the global effect. Clips of Jaishankar's exchange spread across social media platforms. Millions watched, and among them were young people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America who suddenly felt represented. They saw in his composed but firm reply a reflection of their own frustrations. They thought, finally, someone dares to say it openly. That builds solidarity. That builds momentum. Third comes the domestic effect inside India. Ordinary Indians saw their foreign minister standing firm, refusing to be talked down to, refusing to play second fiddle. That fuels national pride. It tells every citizen, your voice matters, your nation matters. You are no longer an afterthought in history. But here is the crucial part. When Jaishankar speaks like this, he does not just challenge the West, he redefines what diplomacy can mean in the modern era. For far too long, diplomacy was equated with sugar-coated language, endless compromise, and polished politeness. Jaishankar has demonstrated that diplomacy can be sharp, blunt, and yet still highly effective. In fact, sometimes blunt honesty is the most effective weapon of all. And this is why leaders worldwide are paying attention, because Jaishankar has pioneered a new model, what could be called assertive diplomacy. A model where you don't beg for approval, you don't endlessly defend, you don't apologize for your interests. Instead, you speak your truth with clarity, you back it up with evidence, and you stand by it without hesitation. That is the kind of diplomacy that resonates in today's multipolar world. Now let us circle back to that brutal truth bomb itself. What made it powerful was not only the words, but the context in which they were delivered. Think about the hypocrisy he exposed. The West criticizes India for buying Russian oil, even as Europe itself keeps importing gas from Moscow. The West criticizes India's democracy, yet openly embraces regimes where dissent is crushed. The West criticizes India for protecting its borders, yet justifies its own invasions as national security. Once you expose those contradictions, the entire narrative collapses, and that is precisely what Jaishankar did. He collapsed the narrative. He forced everyone in that hall and everyone watching online to confront a truth they did not wish to face. The moral authority of the West is no longer beyond challenge. Now imagine the silence in that room. Imagine the discomfort on the student's face. Imagine the dawning realization in the audience that the old playbook no longer works. That was the force of the truth bomb. But here's the fascinating part. This was not an isolated event. Time and again, Jaishankar has delivered such moments, whether in Munich, in New York, in Delhi, or during interviews with Western journalists. He has remained calm, precise, and devastatingly honest. And every time the message is clear: India is not here to please anyone. India is here to safeguard its interests, uphold its values, and shape its own future. This is why I say this was more than just a Q&A exchange. It was a signal of a much larger global shift. The world is no longer unipolar. It is no longer dominated by one or two voices. It is multipolar, diverse, and complex. And in such a world, the West's monopoly on morality is over. Friends, let's put it simply. The American student's question was not merely answered, it was dismantled, demolished, left in ruins. And in its place, Jaishankar built something new, a voice of confidence, a voice of independence, a voice that will lead India, and perhaps much of the global South, into the future. So what does all this mean for you and me? It means we are living through a historical transition. The rise of India is not only about economics or technology or population. It is about voice. It is about reclaiming dignity on the world stage. And Jaishankar's sharp truth bombs are part of that reclamation. This is why his words matter. This is why this exchange matters, because it tells every Indian, every Asian, every African, every citizen of the world, you no longer need to accept double standards. You no longer have to bend before false narratives. You can speak the truth. And when you do, the world will listen, even if in silence, even if uncomfortably. As we near the conclusion of this story, let me widen the lens one final time. That American student may have asked the question, but in reality, she symbolized something larger, the arrogance of a system convinced it could never be questioned. And Jaishankar's reply was not just to her, it was directed at that entire system. It was a message: the days of lectures are finished, the era of dialogue has begun. And make no mistake, this is only the start. Because as India becomes stronger and as the nations of the global South discover their voice, more truth bombs will be dropped. With every one of them, the world order will tilt further away from dominance and closer to balance. That day in that hall, something profound unfolded. An American student asked a question, but what she received was not an answer. It was a revelation that cracked her assumptions, a revelation that echoed across continents, a revelation destined to be remembered as one of the defining moments in modern diplomacy. And that revelation was simple. The truth cannot be monopolized. It can be suppressed for a time. It can be twisted for a time, but eventually it breaks free. And when it does, it cannot be stopped. That is what Jaishankar reminded the world. That is why his words landed like a brutal truth bomb. Years from now, when people reflect on India's rise as a global power, they will not remember only the policies, the trade agreements, or the military strength. They will remember the words. They will remember the confidence. They will remember the day when India's voice shattered arrogance and declared without hesitation that the future belongs to those who speak truth without fear. And as long as there are voices that attempt to dominate, there will be truth bombs to bring them down. As long as leaders like Jaishankar stand up for nations that refuse to be silenced, the world will keep transforming. One exchange, one truth, one act of unflinching honesty at a time.